Let's write some programs around hypertrophy. Let's write some programs around hypertrophy or muscle growth. All right, team, you're here with me, Coach Chickenlegs. I am gonna very quickly write out some programs with you around hypertrophy. We'll briefly discuss them as we're going. If you want more details on hypertrophy or muscle growth, which is the more common name for it, there will be videos on that where we deep dive. But for this instance, I just wanna give you some programs that you can apply for clients, apply for yourself, or just give you a general idea of how I might write something for the generic health and strength and hypertrophy based client. Here's the caveat. This isn't necessarily for a bodybuilder specifically. It's for a generic, everyday run-of-the-mill client you'd see in an average gym who wants to put on some muscle mass, okay? Bodybuilding specifically is a sport and requires a lot of really fine pieces of information and programming that make it efficient and effective. We will look at some of those concepts globally, but understand that there is a lot to it. There's a whole sport built around it, okay? Now, a lot of these concepts we're going to discuss are things we've learned along the way, are based off textbook readings, built off some of the stuff you might find in the Arnold Schwarzenegger Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding, which is fantastic. Also some stuff that I've just picked up along the way with my own coaching and journey. So when it comes to hypertrophy, there's some really basic rules I want you to think about. What I want you to think about is how many sets we're going to do for each muscle group. I want to think about time under tension. Excellent. Those are the two main things. And then I also want to think about what movement patterns are going to be the most relevant. Now, in this channel, our movement patterns we always discuss are the big 9. There's always 9 that we discuss. That is push, pull, plank, squat, lunge, hinge, and gait, ground to standing, and crawl. All movements that we discuss in the context of this channel are in these 9 movements, okay? Bodybuilding, the actual act of growing muscle or hypertrophy training, normally happens in only a few of these spaces. Although you can have growth in all of them, it's just more commonly seen in the push, pull, plank, squat, lunge, hinge space, okay? Gait, which means like walking or running, so the space between feet as you step, you can have growth in that space. You can have growth in ground to standing, and you can have growth in crawl. However, commonly in those 3 spaces, you're using a bunch of muscles instead of isolating a couple, which in hypertrophy training that we're about to find out, likes isolating muscles and fatiguing them to the point where they start tearing so they can grow. In bigger movements like gait, ground to standing, and crawl, where you use a lot of your body to perform the action, as one thing fatigues, other things will take over. So it's harder to get growth in muscle around that space. Certainly not impossible, but is harder. So we're gonna focus a lot on the initial 6 for our training. We may use gait, and we may use crawl, we may use ground to standing to help offset bodybuilding and so that the client doesn't get injured long-term, but our main focus is those first 6. So that's what I wanna talk to you about. That's our movement patterns. The number of sets we like to look at when we're thinking about bodybuilding is between anywhere from 10 plus sets. In some of the literature, if you have a little research for yourself, they say that 10 sets a week for bodybuilding is maintenance, meaning you're not gonna lose muscle mass over that time. Now, that comes with a caveat that it could be depending on intensity as well. You can do a really intense 5 sets and grow muscle tissue. But as a general rule of thumb, and without us deep diving in all the tiny different little arguments that come with hypertrophy, 10 sets is maintenance. So if we want growth, we want to do more than 10 sets on each muscle that we're trying to grow. So if the client's trying to grow their pecs bigger, we're going to need to do more than 10 sets. In this case, we're gonna aim for 15 to 20 sets, okay? Some pro bodybuilders will do more than that. In this case, we're only gonna do 15 to 20. Arnold would often talk about doing 30 plus sets in his particular space. Time under tension is the last thing we're gonna quickly talk about. Time under tension is just about stimulating the muscle as quickly as much as we can. So for hypertrophy and muscle growth specifically, I don't necessarily care how many reps are done within reason. I care about how much tension's being generated. So for example, if I do 12 push-ups really, really quickly, I might not get the same kind of growth as if I did 12 push-ups over the period of 70 seconds or 60 seconds, because it's that act of actually holding yourself up as you're doing your push-ups that can create that time under tension, not necessarily the reps, although that is a factor. A lot of the times when you're talking to some of the pros around this space, the reason they say between 6 and 12 reps, which is common for hypertrophy, is because if each set takes a couple of seconds to do, let's say it's 2 seconds down, 2 seconds hold, and 1 second up, which is 5 seconds per rep. You can range anywhere between 3 and 7 seconds per rep if you want. You can do more, you can do less. But just for context, if each rep takes between 3 and 7 seconds, by the time I do 10 reps, we're looking at something like 30 to 70 seconds of time under tension, which is what we like. That's why we say between 6 and 12, okay? Versus if I do a rep every second, I might not get the same growth that I'm after. It's not so much about the load you lift, it's more about the time of which you are under tension. I can already hear all the power lifters in the comments screaming at me saying that load is important, and you're right, but most general clients can't lift the kind of weights we're gonna ask them to create hypertrophy. So instead, we're gonna go the higher rep range and higher set range to help them grow. So another quick caveat before we write this is that we have 3 different intensities of heart rate when we lift. Low intensity, mid intensity, high intensity. We can have growth in any of these. It just depends on the time under tension for the muscle. If I isolate the bicep and curl it until it goes to full fatigue, the bicep is not really big enough to create your bicep there, that's a head. That's my hand, that's my bicep. The bicep isn't really big enough to create enough blood flow in the body to max my heart rate out too high. I might be able to hit the low or mid intensity heart rate range. That's cool, but being a smaller muscle, it'll probably fatigue before it pumps my heart rate up too high, okay? Versus if I look at something like the quadriceps, the lower limb, the quadricep is a combination of many muscles that are all very, very large. So as they contract and they flex and they move and pump the blood through your body, your heart rate will jack up really, really quickly because there's a lot more muscle. So it's more likely that that's gonna sit in your high to mid range, okay? So these are things to consider when you're looking at clients and working with clients, particularly deconditioned clients who wanna put on muscle mass, or young men who wanna put on muscle mass. When we're being a bit mindful of how quickly we're jacking their heart rates up, remember that large muscles moved often will create high heart rates. Smaller muscles will create lower heart rates, okay? Keep that in mind. So let's deep dive into it. We're gonna write 3. We're gonna do a push, pull, plank day. We're gonna do, in fact, let's make it even simpler. So let's not worry too much. We're gonna do a chest day. We're gonna do a leg day. And we're gonna do a back day. And we're gonna do a second leg day, but it's gonna be hamstring focused. Okay? So, for a beginner, 4 sessions a week is quite reasonable. Some bodybuilders will do 2 sessions a day, so they'll do like 12 sessions over a 6-day period with a rest day on Sunday. Just depends on whoever. In this case, our client is deconditioned. They're a general public who wants to get into hypertrophy training. So let's write them up a little bit of a program. If you've watched my videos before, you know I have 3 warm-up styles I like for beginners, which is 2-step warm-up, 4-step warm-up, and 6-step warm-up. Each of these are used depending on time, group class, and client's specificity, just depending on what the client's doing. 2-step is nice and quick if our client doesn't have a lot of time. 4-step is good for group classes and for newer PTs who are still learning the ropes. And 6-step is good for more advanced PTs who can deep dive on recovery and such. We're gonna say this session is gonna be about an hour and a half because it takes a little bit longer for hypertrophy training to be done because we have to spend more time on each muscle mass. And because we have that kind of time to play with, I'm going to elect to do either a 4-step warm-up or a 6-step warm-up because I have the time to do it, where the 2-step is used for quicker spaces. So for this specific workout, which is going to be our chest day, I want to do a 6-step warm-up. And we'll briefly touch on the warm-ups team. Again, watch the videos relating to them if you want to know more. We're just going to move forward with very little information, assuming you know what we would be looking for in our warm-up. So we'll quickly write it out. In our warm-up for our chest day, for a client, the 6-step warm-up works as such. 4, 5, 6. I have some sort of loosen the tight shit drill. I have some sort of linear drill, meaning doing a movement where my shoulders and hips stay in a line, where I stay straight, whether that be in a plank or whatever, just as long as my hips and shoulders don't move away from each other, which is most gym movements and most bodybuilding and hypertrophy movements, funnily enough. I'm gonna do 2 mobility drills, usually around the joints and the muscles above and below the joints that we're using today. We'll do 1 transverse movement, which is a movement where your hips and shoulders move away from each other. So some sort of rotational movement strength. Really good for injury prevention. Think farmer's strength when we say the words transverse. And then we bring it all home with a linear movement. Ideally something that's gonna make that heart rate trend up a little bit more. The idea of the warm-up is to get someone from resting heart rate to low intensity or mid intensity. That's the goal we're trying to do. We're trying to get the muscles warm enough to start doing these kind of actions that we're looking for. So let's do it. Let's loosen the tight shit. My thoughts here is what is the main muscles we're trying to use today. So if we look at the main movements, our chest day usually is built around the push movement. Okay, what are the main joints involved in pushing? Well, I would say something like the shoulders joint, the wrist joint, and the elbow joint. I would probably argue with you that if we're doing a lot of bench pressing and with push-ups and such, that the elbow joint's gonna cop the most amount of damage. So we'll say it's the elbow joint for the day. My question to you is what is above and below that joint, which is something we've discussed in warm-ups. I would say the biceps, the triceps, the forearms, the shoulders, and the chest are muscles related to this movement. So those are the muscles I'm looking to loosen. And then I would choose the most relevant 2. I know that usually it's the chest and the tricep that's going to cause the most amount of movement today. So let's choose the pecs, the chest muscles. And all I'm going to do to loosen them is I'm going to foam roll. Might foam roll them for 1 minute each side, okay? Okay, fantastic. 1 minute each side foam roll, but if you don't like foam rolling for some reason, or you don't have access to a foam roller, we might do something like a light chest stretch. So we could do something like a crab mobility stretch, crab mob stretch. We could just do a doorway stretch, just something that starts getting our chest to be a little bit looser. We could do a pressure point ball release. Get a pressure point ball in there. Anything like that's really good. I usually save physical stretching or static stretching for the later mobility. So I would rather you do foam rolling or pressure point ball, but that is your prerogative. We today are gonna do foam rolling for the chest. A linear movement, meaning a movement where we are in a line that's related to the chest. Who would have thought a push movement might be a push-up? So I might get the client to do 10 push-ups nice and slow, so I can see firstly how their body's responding to the movement. I can see if their shoulders are caving in. I can see if their core is buckling. It gives us a good indicator of their strength levels already. I can tell if I need to put them against a wall to kind of unload or make the movement easier. So let's do 10 push-ups and we'll do it for 2 sets, okay? Because we're trying to warm them up. Our mobility is very similar to loose and tight shit. We're trying to create space in muscle and create space in joint and length in muscle. That's what we're trying to do. So let's do, in this case, a crab mobility stretch, which I really love for chest, which is when your hands go behind you in a seated position and you lean forward to create stretch in the shoulder and the chest. I also quite like strength overhead, because if we're doing push, we may want to go overhead. So I'm going to do a hanging mobility stretch. Just for the shoulders. Shoulders are one of the first things that you'll see clients lose their mobility in, so they don't have real big issues with overhead movements. That's totally fine. Let's just try to offset it before it becomes a problem, or fix it before we start loading them under the bar, under a weight where we might injure them. This will give us a good indicator as well, if we're doing a hanging mobility stretch, of how much mobility is in their shoulders, and that will allow me to decide if I want to do overhead press work or not, if it's a client that I have just started to train or I don't know very well. For my transverse movement, which is a movement that has rotation, considering it's a chest day, I might decide to do a sit out, where my client's on the floor, they have their hands on the floor, their toes on the floor, they bring a hand up and they sit out from under themselves. A little bit of a complicated movement. If we don't like that for some reason, I might just get them to do a Turkish get up, which is very good for shoulder health, and we really, really like that. If those movements are too complicated for our client, I might just get them to do something really casual. I might give them a kettlebell to hold over their head and they perform a windmill where they try to touch the floor whilst keeping their hands straight. Hey team, if you're liking this content, what I need you to do is follow us, support us, leave comments. We're here to help programmers be better at programming, make coaches and PTs the best of the best that we can, and it starts with programming and it starts with you. Share, like, subscribe. Let's do windmill because it's a little bit kinder for a beginner client, and we might just get them to do 5 reps each side, times 2 sets. For the mobility, I'm gonna give them a minute each. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Linear, let's bring it home. We've done our push-ups, we've done our crabs, we've done our hanging mobility, we've done our windmills, and we've foam rolled and loosened up the chest. I wanna bring it home to the actions that we're doing today. I wanna think chest specifically, which requires a lot of pushing. So I can either get them to do push-ups again, or we might actually start giving them some practice of the movement that we're doing. So I could give them just the barbell for a bench press if I wanted to, a barbell bench press, where we might look at their forms and we might get them to slowly do the movement down to the chest and then tall again. So there's no weight, there's a weight that they can handle really, really well, that we're just slowly lowering and then pressing up, just so we can see where there might be an imbalance, or if we can start developing cues or things that we can get them to work on straight away before we even put load on later in the workout. Gives us time to prep and gives us time to learn our client. So that's absolutely a fine warm-up to do for chest day. Let's look at the workout now. In fact, let's take this whole space. Let's use all of it. So that's your warm-up. Take a photo, enjoy it, have fun with that. Let's get rid of him. Let's now do our workout for chest, remembering that it's an 1.5-hour session. So this is now the actual body, the workout itself. We've got an 1.5 hours. We know that we need to get a lot of sets in to be able to stimulate the chest muscle in this regard. So we remember that our goal here is to go from low intensity to high intensity when we're doing a session. Because if we fatigue our client too quickly, they won't be able to perform as well or as safely, as well as the harder and harder the session gets. We want to kind of hit a natural peak before we end the session with the cool down. It makes more sense for the client, and it will make them understand how far through the program is. And also it means that we can guarantee or heavily ensure that the client is super warm before we get to the really hard stuff. I certainly don't want a client doing sled sprints cold. Dumb idea. I won't get the atrophy, the hypertrophy I want, and I will get the injury I don't want. So the first exercise we're gonna do, they're on the bench already. They're already there, okay? So let's have a play with some bench movements. Now, bench is a large muscle mass, or a large muscle group. If we can save it for later, because it can be challenging. I wouldn't even mind doing it as our second movement. but that's neither here nor there. But just for the interest that they're already on the bench because of the warm-up, let's start them there, okay? We're gonna do between 6 and 12 reps on the bench press. Each rep is nice and slow and controlled. Slow down, up, pause. So we have a cadence, maybe about 3 to 6 seconds per rep, okay? And we want to get it about 5 to 7 sets, okay? This will depend. Let's give them 5 to 7 sets. Why do I do 5 to 7 sets? Usually the first 2 sets are just the client warming up, getting used to the movement and finding their weights, okay? Quite common that that's the case. That way, if I kind of write my first 2 sets off as them finding their groove, if I do between 5 and 7 sets, that will give me 3 to 5 actual working sets. Okay? That's really helpful, really useful information to know. Now, how do we know we're doing working sets? Well, if there's a rule of Goldilocks that I really like and I use a lot in my training and that is, if I have set a rep range of 6 to 12, if my client in the reps gets more than 12, so more than 12 reps, the weight is too easy for them. They must go heavier on the next set. If they get less than 6, then the movement is far too hard for them. So we have to go lighter in weight, okay? That way we're always staying in this zone where we can keep an eye on their reps. They're in the Goldilocks zone, and that way we can monitor their progression. If they're by themselves, they can write it down so we know kind of how they're progressing. And the best thing is if they're documenting their stuff, and they know last week their Goldilocks set, they got about 8 reps at 40 kilos on the bench press. We know after they've done maybe 1 or 2 warm-up sets, they then now can go straight to that 40 kilos because that's what they were working last week. So that way we can see this progressive overload over time. We can see the improvements and we know when to make the change. So let's make this easy. So we're gonna give them 7 sets because we love it. We love a bit of bodybuilding, a bit of hypertrophy training. We're gonna keep the cadence there because we know what we're looking for. We're gonna say 5 to 7 sets. Let's just make it 7 for ease sake, but I've given you my justification why it might alter. 7 sets. I want them to have a rest period of 1.5 times the amount that they worked. So if it took them a minute to do this set, then I'm gonna give them a 1.5 minute rest. Okay. Why do I do that? Because one of the rules that we talk about in these kind of lectures is that for low intensity, I want a range of about 1 to 1 for rest. For middle intensity, I want a range of 1 to 1.5. And for high intensity, I want a range of 1 to 2. That will change dramatically depending on the movements. However, as a general rule, that's how I like my work to rest ratio. Bench press is challenging, it is hard, and we're likely to see that our client goes to a middle intensity during this time. So 1.5 minutes rest is the key, okay? So to keep them on track so that they don't just pump out 6 to 12 reps as quickly as they can, I'm gonna say they need to get 6 to 12 reps within a minute's amount of time. If they get 12 reps before the minute is finished, they just keep going. So they're a minute on with a 1.5 minutes off with the goal of getting 6 to 12 reps. That 6 to 12 reps team is roughly where hypertrophy will sit. That's supported by some text. You might find that that works differently for you. Some clients will work better towards 12. Some clients will work better towards 6. That's okay. You'll find out pretty quick. Okay, but definitely if you're going to specialize in hypertrophy or growth training, that's something to look into. So for this first movement, which is we're going to say is the bench press, we are going to have our 6 to 12 reps, ideally a cadence of 3 to 6 for 7 sets. It's going to be a minute of work with a 1.5 minutes worth of rest. Our goal is to get more than 12 and no less than 6. Document the weights. Now that's a hell of a lot of information to remember, team. Keep in mind that this program If you're with them, that's way easier. If you're not with them and you're giving this to them as a prescripted movement, you can get rid of all of this extra stuff. You can get rid of the cadence. You don't have to tell them about the work to rest ratio. You don't have to get them to do it for a set amount of time. You can just say rest until you feel recovered. The movement, the actual exercise should take about 10 minutes. So they have an idea of how long you expect this to take, maybe 15 minutes because we have higher sets. Keep it simple. When you're prescribing and giving movements to clients and you're not present, so you can't guide them with this information that you know, keep it to less than 3 instructions. Any more than 3, it's not gonna work, it's really challenging. Any less, just keep it simple. And I've said it all the time to some of my colleagues or other personal trainers I've coached, but treat clients as if they have a 3rd year at school intelligence. And that sounds really, really rude, but just for the sake of you writing programs, you using languages, and you overcomplicating or simplifying things, a 3rd year intelligence seems to be a really good spot for most people. Obviously, you don't tell them that, and you don't demean them, and you don't talk to them like a fool, but you don't overcomplicate stuff either. So when you're prescribing movements, and prescribe again is a bit of a funky word, but when I'm prescribing movements to clients, I won't do more than 3 instructions per thing. So for the bench, I'm gonna say, all right, buddy, for the bench, I want you to pick up the bar, bring it to your chest, and imagine you're throwing it away like a nappy. I need you to do between 6 and 12 reps. We're gonna do that for 7 sets. And I want you to go a minute on and a minute and a half off between sets. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that if you get more than 12 reps, you're gonna go heavier. If you get less than 12 reps, you need to go lighter. You're gonna do that 7 times. It should take you about a minute, and I need you to rest for a minute and a half. Does that make sense? Okay, let's make it even simpler. I need you to do 6 to 12 reps for 7 sets. If you get more than 12, it's too easy. If you get less than 6, it's too light. Do it 7 times, rest until you feel recovered enough to go again, and document the weights as you go. Simple, good work, go. So that's the first exercise. We've done bench. Okay, our warm-up has taken us about 10 minutes. That particular exercise just then will take about 15 because of the higher rep range. So we're currently up to 25 minutes of our 90-minute session. So keeping that in mind. So when I write down exercises, I always think about how much time I have, not necessarily about how many movements I prescribe or put in. And again, the word prescribe, people get really funky with it. We don't really prescribe movements. If you're a PT, you're not a health professional in the sense like an exercise physiologist or a physio. You can't prescribe things, but I've just used that language today to make stuff easier, okay? So just keep that in mind. Second movement, we've done our bench. We've done a nice, beautiful linear movement to help us grow, okay? We're still in the low to medium space, probably teetering more towards medium activity. Let's now look, if we're doing hypertrophy, let's look at trying to get some of the upper chest development by either putting the client on an incline bench press with dumbbells, or if that's aggravating for the client's shoulders, I can always put them on a decline to help build up the base, the bottom of the chest, which is fine as well. In my experience, I find clients work a lot better on a decline dumbbell bench press than they do on an incline dumbbell bench press. Dumbbell bench press is hard because it's a lot more cognitive. You don't want to hurt your client. They've got to think as they come down and up. That's fine, we can do that. We don't want the client to get hurt, but we also want the client to get results. So I probably wouldn't give people dumbbell bench press if they're newer, unless I'd done it with them previously. Let's just assume that we have. Okay, so I'm gonna go decline, dumbbell, bench press. Now, let's assume I've done it with them before. Okay, let's give them the exact same exercise brackets that we just did. 6 to 12 reps, 7 sets. Okay, then we're gonna look at a minute on and a minute and a half rest. And remembering the first 2 sets are probably gonna be warm-up sets. If these rep ranges or set ranges are too much for the client, give them 5 or give them 3. It doesn't matter, okay? If the client doesn't wanna live in the gym, 5 to 3 is a little bit more reasonable. But keep in mind that sometimes hypertrophy can take longer because we want higher sets. That's what we're trying to do. We want to increase the sets. It's that, or we increase intensity like CrossFit, where we can put a lot of intensity in a small amount of time to create muscle growth. But for the generic unconditioned client, we're gonna maybe have to go this a little bit easier of a path without injuring them. Yeah, so it's a bit easier. It's not as high intensity. That way there's less room for error, but it does mean it takes a little bit longer. It's like it's like for fat loss, which is a similar concept. I can burn 300 calories really, really quickly and go really, really hard, or I can burn 300 calories over a long period of time going at a lower intensity. But for most people who are looking at fat loss, they don't have the ability to go high intensity just yet anyway. So we usually lean on our lighter intensity. That's really easy, straightforward, similar to what they just did. So they kind of are getting this grasp of how they would kind of expect to do these workouts. We're getting pretty close. We're already on 10 sets for that movement. Beautiful. I imagine at this point their pecs and shoulders are getting pretty sore or fatigued. That's okay. It'll take about 15 minutes as well, based off the calcs. Let's do for number 3. Let's start getting that intensity a bit higher. Okay, so we're currently up to 40 minutes. Okay, let's give them a bit of a circuit. Or you know what, let's keep it in the hypertrophy space. Bodybuilders and people who have bodybuilding in mind often don't like circuits from my experience. It comes across too CrossFitty, or it comes across too like fluffy, where they want traditional movements from traditional bodybuilding that looks like traditional bodybuilding. They like that. They like to see what they do, like Arnold Schwarzenegger does and what Sylvester Stallone does rather. They want traditional stuff they identify and recognize, so we keep it in that space. We don't give them high intensity circuit training if they don't want that, versus if you have a CrossFitter who wants to do hypertrophy, you're probably gonna lean more towards circuits because that's what they understand. But we are going to do a superset. Now, superset is when you do one movement followed directly by another, and then you have a period of rest, often high intensity because of the amount of movements that they're doing and how quickly they're doing it. Okay, so movement 1 is we're going to do, again, thinking about that chest, that movement. I'm going to do something that's challenging to start, and then something that they can allow them to fatigue later. Supersets will often result in fatigue, so I don't want the client injuring themselves during this time. So the supersets I often choose, the 2 movements that I'm gonna choose, are ones that if they were to fail it, there's no big weights dropping on them, or they're like, I'm not doing overhead clean and press because that's very technically driven. I want something simple and easy to understand. So I might get them to do assisted dips with a band or on a machine, followed straight by push-ups. Why'd choose the push-up next to the dip? Because if they're in a commercial gym and there's not a lot of space, or they're not comfortable running around in that circuity style format, they can find the assisted dip machine, or they can create an assisted dip machine with some bands, and then right next to where they've just done that movement, they can do push-ups. Instead of doing something like pullovers, dumbbell pullovers, where I might have to run from this machine straight over to the pullover machine, might not be feasible in the moment. It could be, could very well be. It could be the kind of gym that you have that accessibility, but in big box commercial gyms, usually things are busy, people are using stuff, and you don't really want to get in the way, and you want the client to feel as at ease as possible. Every single hurdle that is in front of each movement, if there's something that makes it a little bit more difficult to do, it's more likely the client won't do it if you're not in their presence. Okay, if you're with them, you can just book out 2 machines and you laugh and no problems. So you might want to switch out the push-ups and the dips for 2 movement-based or machine-based movements. Like, for example, I could do, if I'm with the client, I could do seated press, so actual like chest press, which is the seated machine that locks you in and you press, followed straight by dumbbell pullovers if I want. That's as fine as well. Pull over. Again, we're just completely destroying their chest at the minute. They're gonna feel very done after this. Either or, it doesn't matter. For supersets, I don't care so much about the reps, although it is important. I do like to keep that in mind, that 6 to 12 reps. So I guess it is important. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a minute on, then they have 10 seconds to get from exercise A to exercise B or exercise 1 to exercise 2. Then they're going to complete for me another minute. Then, since this is high intensity, we're probably going to rest for double the amount of time or close to. So since it's taking them about 2 minutes, I'm going to rest them for no less than 2 minutes, which is exact, and aiming probably more towards 4 minutes, depending on how much output I want to give. If I'm giving them 2 minutes followed by 2 minutes, what you'll find is the client will peak and then trough off. So for example, if they can move for the assisted dips, they can usually do about 11 reps. And for the push-ups, they can do about 10 reps. If I don't give them enough rest, you'll see that they'll probably start dropping from 11 to 10, 10 to 9, 9 to 8, etc., which is fine as long as they're staying within the rep range. But if we're looking for output, more rest is better. Do keep in mind that time is a big factor. So from my point of view, let's do 2 minutes rest. Although that is absolutely on the cusp of high intensity, I would rather it be ×2 the amount of effort, but keeping in mind that time sensitiveness of the workout. Just be aware that if they start dropping below the 6 rep range, challenging, we need to start adjusting the workout. You can either make the bands heavier so they can do more dips, or I can change the angle of the push-up up or down to make it easier or harder. So I can put them against a wall, I can put them on their knees, or I can raise their legs, or I can put them on a TRX, whatever. So we can adapt the intensity as we go. So let's do that 3 times. Why? Because this is a chest exercise and this is a chest exercise, although assisted dips does have a bit of triceps involved as well. So in total, that's like 6 sets, which is running similar along to the ones we've just previously done up here, which is about 5 working sets, right? In this case, they're gonna fatigue so quickly that I don't wanna rip the muscles apart to the point where they cannot function or they get injured. This is already pretty high intense for a newer client. As we're going through this program, we're already starting to see that it's probably tailored more to an intermediate client. If you were to do this, a superset with a brand new beginner, they're gonna text you at 4 o'clock in the morning saying how they needed Nurofen because they couldn't sleep because their biceps, triceps, chest, shoulders were on fire. Okay, they woke them in the middle of the night, which is not our goal. Okay, so that's gonna be exercise 3. Now, that's gonna take, it's about 4 minutes to run through the whole thing, a little bit more like 5 because of the 10 seconds rest in between, and there's gonna be some fluff around. So it's 5 minutes per set. There's gonna be three rounds through. So that's gonna be about 15 minutes, same as we've just done. Have a look at that now, let's wipe it out. So that's giving us about 15 minutes. So that's putting us now at 55 minutes worth of work. So we've got a little bit of time left, we're doing well. Let's finish the chest off, let's completely cook it now. Let's remove it from the torque by finishing it on a really high intensity movement, a HISS movement, which is high intensity, steady state, meaning we're gonna push it as hard as we can for as long as we can. And as soon as they're done, either via time or by reps. So this one we're gonna keep nice and short. I'm not gonna let them do more than 3 to 5 minutes because you can't have that much output, that much intensity for that long. Okay, we just can't go that hard forever. You'll find that the client will peak in their heart rate. They'll get to the high intensity space, but if you leave them there too long, they'll start naturally drifting back down. And if our goal is to keep them high in heart rate so we can get a lot of hypertrophy, a lot of growth, then we kind of want to stick to that space. Okay? Now, how this is going to work is this. If the client is more circuity or more general health, or this is a hypertrophy session that you've snuck into a functional training program or a generic training program, I might get the person to do 3 minutes for as many AMRAP, We're gonna do as many reps as possible, or an AMRAP, which is quite common, we can do ball wall throws if we want, ball wall throws. which is where we grab a big medicine ball, we slam it against the wall, catch it, slam it, catch it, slam it, catch it, slam it, catch it. You can do ball throws, as in you throw it as far as you can, chase it, grab it, throw it. This is pushing movements, and this is just to bump that heart rate up, to really burst all of those chemicals in your body that help you with growth. We're trying to create a high heart rate output to help grow any damaged tissue that we've done, okay? This is if the client is not adverse to doing some stuff that's a little bit different. It is the reason I like something like this is because it uses the whole body. So that way, if the client is really fatigued from the previous movements we've just done and they're cooked for the day, then other muscles can start taking over so they can still perform the movement, okay? Adding more muscles into the action will help jack that heart rate up quicker, which is good as well. However, what you'll find is guys who are more traditional in bodybuilding or hypertrophy will not like this form of circuit. That's fine. We can get rid of it and do something along the lines of 3 minutes as many push-ups as they possibly can. Push-ups. They can do as many bench press as they can with like 40% of their 1RM or 40 or even 30% of their body weight or whatever, right? Something that's a bit more traditional, but it has to be lots and lots and lots over and over and over again. The bench press for 3 minutes is something that the people I know really, really like. In the past, my clients, anything bench press, people lose their minds, they love it. We've done a decline bench press, we've done a flat bench press, so we could make this an incline bench press for 3 minutes, and as many reps as possible. Alternatively, we could do dumbbell pullovers as well. So it doesn't really matter what it is, it's more about the intensity. For the sake that we've done the other two, let's end the chest section of this workout with a incline bench press. Now, keep in mind, incline bench press, flat bench press, all this bench press work is gonna cook the shoulders. This is something that is very prevalent when you do that form of training. Please be mindful with your clients not to cook them or really hurt them, and make sure that in their recovery days, in their warm-ups, in their cool-downs, we are offsetting the amount of shoulder load that they're getting. Even in a shoulder day, be mindful not to overload the front deltoid even more, because we're doing so much front deltoid work inside the chest push day anyway. But let's do incline bench. Let's say 3 minutes and set a weight that's appropriate. If it's their first time ever, get them to have a little play with the bar first to see what they like, and then document. Document how many things they've done, how many reps, what's the weight, and then each week try to improve if possible. This might be a program that you do every week for their chest day for 6 to 8 week blocks, which is kind of the amount of space I would want to work with before I change up the program. I don't want to overdo it. 6 to 8 weeks is more than enough, particularly for documenting things as we go. So we want to improve. Let's say it's an incline bench press. We want to do as many things as we possibly can, as many reps, and there's obviously no rest, with the exception of them putting down the bar to go, then they grab the bar and they keep going again, but no rest on paper, because it is high intensity and it is steady state. High intensity interval, which is HIIT training, which you'll hear everyone talk about when they're trying to sell you stuff in the modern gym day. High intensity interval is going up and coming down like this. Interval, the key word there is that there is a point where you return back to the resting heart rate before you re-enter your high intensity, your higher heart rate. High intensity interval training, high intensity steady state training, which is HIIT training, is steady state means you do not return back down to interval. So when you talk to PTs and when you're learning yourself, understand that there's lots of different types of heart rates, not just HIIT. HIIT is a bit of a marketing ploy that they do at the minute. So this is going to take about 3 minutes. Let's call it 5 with all the fluff and the rest in between. So now you're up to 6 minutes, 60 minutes of a session. We've got easily another 20 minutes left, because we want to try and do a really in-depth cool down so that way we can help offset those shoulders. let's have a look at what's the other muscles focused around this chest day. A lot of people think chest and tris is really common. If it's a push day, we can look at other pushing movements like overhead press, you can look at leg press, you can start incorporating many things. People in the bodybuilding, in the muscle growing space, kind of do a couple of different things. They either do chest and tris, they might do chest and back, they might do push day completely, push pull split, where they do legs incorporated into the push. They might do push pull legs split, that's fine as well. Since we've already done dips potentially and we've already done all pullovers potentially, our triceps are already pretty stimulated. So let's use the last 20 minutes to focus on the tricep as well. The beautiful thing is the client is super cooked. We can save our high intensity 3-minute AMRAP for the very end of the session if you wanted to, and cook their triceps before you do that, or you can do it after the fact, up to you. You'll probably find that the client would rather you build everything up to the peak like we discussed, then bring it down, rather than do chest, peak, block, up, tricep, peak, block. Okay, just depends on client's preference or your preference as a program writer. I would suggest you try these programs out when you do them and write them yourself, because you'll feel where the natural flow of the workout goes. If it feels really janky and odd, then it probably needs to be rewritten in some capacity. So let's say this is our 5th exercise now. We're gonna do tricep cable push downs. We're really just trying to fatigue those triceps. We're gonna do something along the lines of what we started with. We're gonna do between 6 and 12 reps. We're gonna do it for a minute. If they get more than 12, it's too easy. Less than 12, it's too hard. Minute and a half rest. So we're bringing it back down to that mid intensity. We're almost troughing them back up and down. We're gonna do somewhere between 5 and 7 sets, or 3 and 7 sets, depending on their skill set and the times you have available. That will absolutely fatigue the client. And we might end it, if we've got our 6, we have the time to do it, so that will take them about 15 minutes. Even if we shorten it to 3 to 5 sets, that'll take about 10 minutes, which is good. Let's add in one more exercise for the triceps, which is only going to take them 10 minutes. So that way we have time to cool down properly. Let's do, for number 6, let's do overhead tricep press, okay? Tricep extension. And exactly the same rep range and time, 6 to 12, minute of time. We might even give them a minute of rest because this is a higher intensity session, or we're trying to create it as such. And we want to do between 3 and 7 sets, depending on time, depending on skill set, depending on the client. That is almost all a giant linear day team, which means that it's relatively, very broadly safe for the client. If you're doing it with them, it's a lot safer. But for a beginner who's got issues with twisting and turning, or they have a weight issue, this is incredibly traditional. You'll see that this is like 90% of what PTs will write for you these days, because it's traditional bodybuilding. Most people who want hypertrophy, who want growth, are gonna follow a similar format of linear training, often creating high amount of sets to stimulate muscle growth with moderate amount of reps, large rest times, okay? So don't be surprised if in a program that's built around muscle gain and extraordinarily amounts of muscle gain, that it's mainly linear. So our job as a coach is to make sure we do some transverse and some mobility exercises so that we don't hurt the client. We make sure the client stays uninjured and unbreakable. So in a big week program for them, I'd probably have 2 recovery days where I'm offsetting all of this growth, all of this linear training, so they don't get torn and injured. So let's do our cool down. Cool down's gonna take 5 minutes, maybe. They're not clocks, team. This is a guide for you. You'll find that there's gonna be things that slow the client down, speed the client up. There's gonna be issues, there's gonna be conversation, there's gonna be slow activity, whatever. This is a general guideline for 90 minutes worth of training. So if I say 5 minutes for cool down, it could take 10. It could be little water breaks in between, phone calls, whatever. So we might pull a little bit short. We might give ourselves 5 to 10 minutes of leeway just for them to transition between things. That's fine. So for cool down, we follow the same concepts as the warm up. We're looking to identify the main movement of the day, main movement or the main exercise. We're looking at which joints were the most used, which muscles are above and below those joints, and we're gonna loosen the tight shit. So, main movement, chest and push. Main joints that we used today was the elbow joint, I'd say got pretty whacked, because not only was, yes, the shoulders were being used for the chest, but as soon as we started incorporating those tricep movements, we're getting a lot more elbowy than we are shouldery, but you could cool down either. For the muscles above and below, that's triceps, biceps, but we also want to stretch the chest and we want to loosen these things. So let's start with some muscles. We've done a lot of chest movement, so let's loosen up the chest a little bit. We could do a doorway stretch like we did, easy. Hands between two cages, step forward, create length, create space. We might do that for a minute. Okay, so remember that when we rip muscles for hypertrophy, when we're growing muscles, we do little micro tears and then they will heal always shorter over themselves. They're always gonna heal a little bit shorter than they do in general. So it's our job as a coach to remind our clients to create length. Otherwise you're gonna have like these concaved gorilla looking people who can barely walk because they're so tight and they can't touch their backs, and therefore they can't, it limits them in doing other movements and it limits their hypertrophy growth potential, because as their muscles get too short, they can't generate as much power or lift as heavy or move as much, so they can't grow anymore because they're too constricted like this. We want to keep them nice and open and loose. So we're gonna do a chest doorway stretch. Simple. Since they're so warm from the activity that we just did, we can do static stretching. That's totally fine. We don't need to do dynamic necessarily because they're already so warm. We're gonna do that for a minute. I'm very adamant that I don't want these clients to get really nasty tightness. So from experience, bodybuilding or hypertrophy style training often leads to lifter's elbow. It's really, really common because of the gripping of the bar. So what I really like to mainly incorporate in most of the push-pull days for clients is some sort of forearm stretch. So I'm gonna get them to do a kneeling forearm stretch where they put their palms on the floor and allow that big stretch throughout their muscles. And then I'm also gonna get them to go knuckles down to do a stretch on their forearms. So forearms, knuckles up, and knuckles down, stretch, down. And that's gonna be maybe 30 seconds each side. You'll find that some clients really struggle with this, and that's a good indicator that they're leading towards elbow discomfort. Elbow and forearm flexibility and strength is gonna be massive long-term for your client. And let's finish with some joint space creation, which is where I'm gonna create length in the joint. So since we've done so much compression this way and they're getting really tight this way, I love that hanging mobility drill. We're gonna open up the shoulders, which preps them for later push movements, because if they can't keep their forms correct whilst doing an overhead press, we don't load them in it. And we've created so much tension here in the chest, we're gonna open them so they're nice and long and strong. So we're gonna finish with joint space creation, which is gonna be a hanging mobility drill. So just hanging from a bar or a cage. Feet still need to be on the floor so the client can dictate how much movement they're going through. Just turning and rotating, creating space in the spine, in the T-spine, in the shoulders, and the wrists, and the elbows. Fantastic. Hitting lots of joints all in one go, and it's decompressing the body where a lot of lifting compresses the body. So as I hold the bar, the wrist gets squished against the ulnar radius, that gets squished against the humerus, that gets squished against the shoulder joint, which it is designed to do, so we're all good. But over a lifetime, that can create a lot of issues amongst the joint. So it's as important it is to elongate the joint as it is to shorten the joint, which will become from our lifting. So that's easily 5 minutes done there, team, because that's going to take about a minute. So We've done a 10-minute warm-up. We've done the 6-step warm-up to give the client the best form of the warm-up for the muscle in the joint that we were gonna smack onto today. We've done a 15-minute first exercise, which was our bench, 15 minutes for the second exercise, 15 minutes for the third. We've done a beautiful little 5-minute drill, which was a fourth. Then we did 2 tricep drills. Now, each of these were 5 working sets for the first 2 muscles, so that's already looking at 15 sets here. Our 5-minute, our superset that we did, that was 1 on, 1 off, that was about 6 sets, and then we also finished with, we'll call it 1 set of the higher intensity activity for the chest. So we've now hit 21 sets of chest movement with a little bit of triceps in there as well. And then for our triceps themselves, we did about 10 sets, but we got a little bit of it of the chest as well. So now both our chest muscles, our pectoral muscles specifically, and our triceps have gotten more than 10 sets, and therefore will likely go through hypertrophy. It will start to grow over time. Here's the caveat with hypertrophy, team, that I need you to understand. Your nutrition and your recovery is almost more important than the actual work itself. Because whilst we train, that's telling the body we need to grow. Time to grow, mate. There's something happening. Something's changing in your environment that provides the need. Your body's being told there is a need for growth. And then your food and your rest allow the body to grow. So if we're not doing enough of this, we won't get any growth. If we're doing too much training and not enough resting, you're creating a lot of need with not enough fuel for it to work. It's like driving my car really fast or driving my car for a long period of time without giving it any fuel or replacing the oil or getting new water in it. Eventually the car will either break down or stop working completely, or something will blow up, which is not what we want, which would, in this case, would be an injury. But if I keep putting fuel and oil and water and checking the pressure of the tires, the car will go for as long as I need it to go for. So massively important that food, rest, and training in combination is the key. One is not more powerful than the other. It's when all 3 are done in equal parts. That's the trick, okay? You must get your rest 7 to 9 hours, right? You must have your food. In this case, you'd want to be in a little bit of a calorie surplus. If you're having issues with your nutrition, go to my free nutrition program that's on this YouTube channel as well, or wherever it is you're listening to this program, and then make sure your programming is good. And how do we know it's good? You're not getting injured. Your metrics that you're marking down and testing for the clients or for yourself are improving. If you're not actively improving, if you can't provide evidence to me that you've improved, how the hell do you know anything's working? We can do that with documentation, where we're documenting the weights we're doing. We can do DEXA scans to actually see how much muscle mass we've put on. We can do weights. We can do at least 5 testing metrics is what I always suggest. And I'm gonna really annoy you all now by saying, on average, in a month, if you've got really good nutrition and you've got really good eating habits, nutrition's the same thing. If you've got really good sleeping habits and you've got really good training programs and you've got really good rest, which is a big thing for your client, you may see somewhere between 200 and 400 grams of lean muscle tissue put on a month. Not a week, a month. So that's an insane amount of muscle mass in a month, as in it doesn't sound like a lot. Because fat loss, you can see anywhere between 200 and 500 grams a week, depending on your excess fat tissue, your subcutaneous excess tissue. But for muscle mass, it's really slow. It's a slow process. And when you start going, some people at the beginning of their journey have more than this. Some people have less than this. This is a general, but this is why bodybuilders spend 10 years just building a foundation and then another 10 years in competition. Because by that time, they could put on 20 kilos of muscle or 30 or 40 kilos of muscle, but it takes years, not months. Make sure you tell your client that stat, so that way they don't go, what the hell, mate? I did 12 weeks of a program with you with great nutrition, great rest, great recovery and great programming, and I only put on, you know, something like 600 grams of muscle mass. That's about right. That's good. That's a fantastic result, okay? Now just do that times another 10 rounds and you'll have a shit ton more muscle mass. Yeah, you'll have almost 6 kilos then. But my point is that if you give clients unreasonable expectations, then they're, particularly in hypertrophy, because everyone loves hypertrophy, you're gonna get mixed results and bad reviews. Be honest with clients from the get-go. Do remind them that they're gonna feel a lot better really quickly, and they're gonna be changing clothes really quickly if they have weight issues, and they will start noticing themselves. Just be patient. Okay team, hopefully that was helpful. We will deep dive on the facts and features around hypertrophy at a later date, and we might even do a video of us doing this workout so you can kind of see some of the cues that we might use for it. Okay, this video has gone well over time, so we're gonna stay just with our press today, and we'll look at our legs, we'll look at pull days and other things at another time. All right, see ya.